Okay, well, welcome. I'm glad you can all hear me. So let's crack on straight away because we're all busy people. I think first of all, why am I bothering to do a webinar about resilience? It's because my own experience of leading multiple change initiatives for different clients is that we've never needed resilience more. I think the scale of the change is getting bigger because we've got high volumes of change. One change is feeding another, and those multiple changes create multiple side effects, unintended consequences that lead to yet more change and lead to greater uncertainty, which we fill with yet more changes. So I think the need for our ability to keep going, to think about our resilience, has never been greater. And everybody I talk to just goes, it's so hard. I'm under so much pressure. I'm exhausted. So again, let's have a look at the chat function. If that message is resonating with you, if resilience is something you're interested in because it's actually got hard. We thought the pandemic was hard, but I think the impact of hybrid working, the impact of multiple changes, the impact of racing to get things out to our customers, to fix things. Yeah. So yeah, and if you think the volume of change is getting higher, put a 1 in. If you think it's copable, put a 2 in. Yeah. But otherwise, yeah, okay, then I'm not the only exhausted person on this webinar then. Okay, that makes me feel good because I am shattered. And I do this for a living. So I'm not just giving you a webinar on resilience. Every single thing I'm talking about, I'm just reminding myself, yeah, you need to use that. Or I can honestly tell you I've used it in the last week or so. It's that ability to sort of keep going. So let's have a look at what we're talking about. Well, I kind of like the Latin resiliere, which is to bounce back. I'm not showing it in this webinar, but I'm sure you all know the famous video of the trampoline artist who falls off the staircase and bounces back onto the staircase. I've revised the paper I wrote on resilience, and I put that video clip link in there. So I will be sending out the document that goes with this webinar that you can share around your colleagues as well. So that definition, bounce back, it's being able to keep going despite setbacks. And I think there's something in there around, there's a quiet resilience, I think, in organizations. I think the resilient people don't always make a big song and dance about it. They don't make a big fuss. I think possibly because they don't always regard themselves as resilient. I think that it's just their natural ability to keep going, to call on those reserves. I know I am a very resilient person. I know like all of us, I've had a huge number of setbacks in life. I've coped through huge amounts of grief. But I do know that my predominant character trait is to keep going. So I understand I'm resilient, but that's just the inner core of me. I don't think it's something that those who have resilience necessarily make a fuss about. But my job in the last few years has had to really dig deep and look into, well, what is that resilience and what's it made up of? Because you have got to help others develop it, Melanie, because it's never been more needed. When I look at what makes resilience, I think, first of all, there is a huge amount of flexibility in there. I think flexibility because we actually have to change course. And so we have to recognize that maybe the course we're on isn't delivering us the results we need, or maybe what we're doing isn't working. And therefore, all is not lost. A resilient person just says, I'm going to try a different solution. I'm going to try a different direction. After all, the definition of madness is to keep doing the same thing, but expect different results. So flexibility, positivity, absolutely. It's that solution mindset. It's the mindset that it's almost the opposite of the victim mindset. The victim mindset is, why me? The more resilient mindset is, why not me? And the positivity also comes from that ability to find good things, to find achievements, successes, enjoyment, even in the smallest of things. It's that ability to look at any situation and go, well, at least we did that. I've been in this offsite for 3 days now, and there are moments when I have genuinely felt physically sick because we've had brilliant conversations. There's been a lot of innovation amongst the team, but that has also led me to feeling sick because we've uncovered yet more work that needs to be done. And again, this morning when we were in Brisbane, that's exactly what happened. And a whole new workshop evolved, and a whole new big report that needs to be created evolved. And I sat back and we took a few minutes walk after that meeting, a colleague and I, and just a few minutes outside because I really needed to sort of stand up and go for a walk. And it was, the positivity was going, okay, so we've just uncovered yet more obligations, but what we're talking about here is the right thing to be doing. It's a great quality response to what we need. We're going to be proud of this piece of work. I'm really pleased we identified it. And in order to find the positivity, I needed to step outside of the current time frame. Which is, oh, how are we going to fit this in? And so I started using the phrase, this time next summer, we will be really glad we've done this. This time next summer, we will look back and we will go, thank God we did that. So I've been able to find that positivity, in this case, by shifting the time frame almost away from the immediacy and the urgency of how we're going to fit it in, the panic, into the gratefulness. So there is definitely a skill set around there. And then there is the agility piece. And I think this is agility in the widest sense. And we're going to look at a technique that delivers on this, which I think feeds positivity. I really do, because it feeds a sense of achievement. And it absolutely is grounded in flexibility. So I'm going to give you some techniques that I think really help. But this agility is this, I can abandon the need to have everything planned up front. I can abandon the need for perfectionism. I can accept that I'm going to nudge myself through a situation little bit by little bit. And again, that nudging, each of those little nudges takes me in the right direction, and that feeds that positivity as well, because I've got something I can celebrate each time. So I think these are the foundational elements for me of resilience. David Kessler is an incredibly respected grief expert. And he talks about, when he talks about grief, he talks about anticipatory grief and how the brain actually gets worried ahead of time. It can see bad things happening, and therefore it kicks in with that. We start to grieve the loss of certainty. We start to grieve the loss of confidence. I think the thing, when we have resilience, we've got that continuous progress through all the changes that are happening to us, one after the other. We can start going through. So at the end of the day, that's where we want to be, in this arrow down the middle. But I think when you haven't got resilience, what happens is a couple of things. First of all, we give up. The immediate thing is, oh, this is too hard, this is too big, this is too complex, and we give up. Okay, that's not particularly brilliant, but it does happen. It's too hard to keep going. I think the other thing that we do is we get distracted by easier work. The two go together, don't they? Because I just don't know where to get going with this. This is too much. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll go and find something that's easier to do this morning. That'll just make my life easier. So I think resilience it's almost a vicious circle, isn't it? Because if we don't have that resilience, we give up or we get distracted. And then actually that makes the problem far worse, because now we're further behind than we ever were. And then we're feeding more panic, and it's far harder to get started again. So we give up and we feed that vicious circle, and we don't get anywhere. So we've got to nip this lack of resilience in the bud, I think. And that's where we've got to help people with these very practical techniques that I'm going to show you. So how much resilience is currently out there in terms of multiple changes taking place? McKinsey came out, and I'll do some work in LinkedIn over the next couple of weeks to share some of it with you. But they've come out with their sort of state of organisations for 2023, and they make some very interesting points, and one of which is sort of they're looking for that resilience in terms of organisations being able to cope with the many changes that are coming their way and the pressures that are coming their way. So resilience is certainly getting some traction. I run the Global Capability for Change survey every September. If you want an invite to that, it is, we have to limit the invitations to those who are, and it's not job title because we don't have universal job titles in the world of change. But if you are responsible for building the capability for change in your organization, so you are perhaps in a change professional role, a transformational director role, a portfolio management role, a strategy role, an organizational design role, learning and development role, where you are interested in how do we build this skill set so our staff, our managers can lead themselves and others through change. Come and talk to me. Because the reason we limit the access to the survey, by the way, is because what we need is responses like for like around the world from people who are doing roughly the same role. So we do need to keep an eye on that. But the data is very interesting. Less than half of organisations, people were saying, actually, our people know change is coming. So it's hard to be resilient when, resilience is eroded by surprises. If you don't know something's coming, then it's hard to prepare for it, and it can knock you off course. So then you have to call on your resilience to get back on, to get back up and running. So why would we create those conditions? Why would we make it harder for people in organizations? By the way, there are two scores here. One is implicit, one is explicit. Implicit is based on what you truly feel. Explicit is what you think is happening in your organization. And the way that the questions are constructed in this survey is neuroscientifically, we are tracking not just what you think is happening by your analytical part of your brain, but we also get that more emotive answer from your brains. So that was really important to me, as everything I'm doing in change is grounded in neuroscience these days. Excuse me, I've been talking too much on this offsite for the last 3 days. Maria, you've raised your hand, but I'm not sure we can hear you because it's a webinar, not a course. So if you can, if I put something in the chat, let me know what it is you would like to say. I will have a look at that. No worries. Sorry, I'm going to try and stop coughing now. Not only do we not tell people change is coming, this really scared me. Less than 4 in 10 of us think that people in our organisations have the time to adopt new ways of working. And about 4 in 10 of us think that the level of change is absolutely manageable. I mean, it's just terrifying, isn't it? So 60% of us think that the level of change isn't manageable. So we've got a situation where, you know, we already think that people are out of control. So no wonder they need resilience. Yeah. Priyanka's asked about how I can tell you how I get the measures for implicit scores. No, I can't tell you because it's the IP of the testing center that we use. But it's based on cognitive dissonance. That's probably all I can say. I'm sorry, Priyanka. And then the last score here is that, again, less than 4 in 10 in organisations develop change management skills in our people. We don't feel that we're doing that. So we're not really helping the situation. So I think when it comes to how much resilience do we really have, I think the answer is not enough. So we're going to fix some of that today in this webinar. I'm just crossing back and forth in terms of the chat, just making sure. Here we go. And let's just see what else is there. Capacity, somebody said, is a massive issue. Yes, I think there is, Ed, there is a virtuous circle here between resilience and capacity, because So I do think resilience is about smart working in a way, because if I am creating the conditions for people to feel resilient, then I can fully utilize those resources. Whereas if I damage their resilience, if they, effectively, if I go back to this earlier situation where if we don't have resilience, people give up very early on, or they get distracted by easier work, then I've lost that resource. And I'm very conscious that in change these days, getting the attention of anybody to help me with the change and to participate in it is already incredibly hard. So to lose valuable resources when I've got their awareness, I've got their attention about the change, I've got them feeling positive that they want to change, and then I just let them drift away because I damaged their resilience, or I didn't encourage their resilience, I just think we're mad. So building resilience, what are we doing here? Well, we've said, it's that bounce back. I think we need to look at words to help us understand what it is we're trying to develop here. I think persistence is a helpful word, because that is one of the elements here. We want people to persist in doing something, not give up. It's the opposite of giving up, isn't it? Persist in pursuing a course of action despite the obstacles, despite the setbacks. And again, another word that I find incredibly useful is determination. When you think about determination, you think, well, that sounds like a good quality that somebody's got. Determination to see something through to its conclusion, whatever the pressure. And I often say to senior leaders, I sort of say, these are qualities that people persist in doing something. They show a level of grit and determination. Are we rewarding that? Now, I don't mean financially. What I mean is that when you're talking to your staff, are you congratulating them on their ability to keep going? Are you acknowledging that? Because when we look at motivation, one of the key elements of motivation is that we feel heard and seen, and that our efforts are noticed. So are we noticing when people display some of these qualities that actually are incredibly helpful when it comes to resilience? They're actually exhibiting resilience. So that's often one of the questions I ask. What interests me about building resilience is, again, I've said earlier, I have to look at what is great resilience, and then I try to sort of break it down into its core elements. And I think one of them is that there is a structural element. What I mean by that is that there are habits, there are routines, there are plans, there are timetables when things need to get done. What you're helping people to create is a routine. Because one of the things that interests me, again, back to David Kessler and the grief work that he does, and also in my previous life when I was head of crisis management, and I was dealing with lots of things around natural disasters and terrorist atrocities. So I've encountered a lot of grief. And one of the things that interests me is how impactful routine can be. And when people are suffering, when you need them to still put one foot in front of the other and still be able to keep going, it is actually routine that does that. It is that people feel an obligation. I still need to take the children to school. However much grieving I'm doing, I still need to take the children to school. I still need to put food on the table at the end of the day. Whatever the routines are, routine is a massive element of practical resilience, if you like. And then there's the emotional support. The emotional support is when we're sort of looking at reframing the situation. So we're back now to positivity. I feel sick this morning about the work that we've uncovered. There's so much that we need to be doing. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how are we going to get all that in there? And when we went for a few minutes walk, I reframed it. I reframed it into, aren't we lucky that we've identified this incredibly important piece of work? Aren't we lucky that we've identified a resource to do it? and that she's a very high quality resource, and that what we're going to get is going to be fantastic. And aren't we lucky? This time next year, we'll be so satisfied. We'll be congratulating ourselves. So I've created the emotional support for myself, first of all, by using that positive mindset, but also I spread it out amongst those who are also feeling anxious. And basically you can tell that people wanted to give up and go home, because one lady put her head in her hands when she realized we'd discovered yet more work. And then I think there's the piece around collaboration as an element of resilience. I think that collaboration is a recognition that the brain gets a huge amount of support from society, from the socialization with others. It's because other people can have different perspectives and can show us ways that we can get something done, that other people have ideas that we might not have had, or sometimes it is just that we've been noticed by other people. I think I've said on a previous webinar that I was reading a lot about socialization, collaboration, and the effects of connection between people during lockdown. And where I live, it was a very significant lockdown. You were allowed out for 1 hour a day, and you weren't allowed out past the boundaries of a few streets of your house. I was, I was looking after my elderly father, so I was under a huge amount of pressure. And I noticed, though, that I took my dog out in my 1 hour per day. And I noticed that when I met or obviously not met, but across the street, I could see a fellow dog walker, and we just acknowledged each other and said hello, that I felt, I smiled at another human being. That's a tiny snippet of what collaboration really feels like, but it has a big impact, and it's what we want to achieve. That's what we're looking for. So I think building resilience, I'm going to look today at the structural support that I think we can develop through using planning techniques, but obviously emotional, the reframing, positive reframing, and that collaboration is key to it as well. So let's have a look at what we're doing here. So I think if we go back to that idea of flexibility, positivity, and agility that I talked about earlier on, and I said agility was that in the wider sense, nudging ourselves towards the bigger picture we want. It minimizes the amount of resilience I need, because I can do sort of small amounts. I can abandon perfectionism because I can go, well, I've got a little bit done, so let's see if that's there. Let's have a quick look at what this really means. Well, I can't help but use the example of this webinar as a good example. When I first put this together, I write a paper as well that it's almost like a full script for this webinar of all the points I want to make, and also the diagrams I want to show you. And it's a huge amount of work. And I had this experience of, I can't do this. I'm going to give up. I can't do this. I know hundreds of you were signed up for the webinar, which is not great for you, but I was under so much pressure with so many other deadlines. I was genuinely trying to think, how can I get out of this? I can't cope. I can't do any more. So I had to use the techniques. And here, right now, I think is one of those structural techniques. And I have my memory of this is very, very clear. I was very upset that I was failing on a big piece of work that was noticeable to a large audience like yourselves, because I just wasn't going to have this webinar ready. And I walk my dogs twice a day, and I was walking my dogs in the morning, and I was going back to that idea of positivity and flexibility. Well, the flexibility, no, I couldn't really do much. I had to stick on this journey. But positivity, can I reframe things? Can I let's feel more positive about doing the webinar, Melanie? But the reason I want to talk to you today about the structural sort of support for building resilience is that in that situation, do you know what? The reframing didn't help. It's almost like it wasn't a strong enough solution to the situation. So today, people feeling a bit sick and overwhelmed and a bit panicky, and then reframing that into a celebration of what this extra piece of work is going to give us, that has worked. So again, I'm just trying to show you that there are so many facets to creating resilience, and the reframing absolutely worked today on the situation we were dealing with today. But when I got myself in, I absolutely got myself in a complete tizzy about doing this webinar, writing the paper, designing the diagrams, doing all the research, because although I go to lectures on positive psychology and neuroscience every 2 weeks, even so, I still do a lot of research, and I listen to lots of webinars, and I read lots of books as well. And fitting all that in at the same time that I am trying to do 2 major launches for clients just felt absolutely overwhelming. So the structural technique I'm showing you now was really important, because I needed to find a way out. And to be honest, the flexibility wasn't there, the positivity wasn't working, but this structural bit did. So first of all, I'm going to create a roadmap. I'm going to chunk up my work into, for little iterations. Now, you can use the word iteration or increment. You could use stage or tranche or phase or wave. Effectively, what you're doing is you're taking the bigger job that you've got to do that feels overwhelming, that you want to give up on, and you are saying to yourself, or if you're leading others, now hang on a minute, it's huge, yes, but do you know what? We're going to take it one step at a time. That's what a roadmap's all about, is that we're going to have the first iteration is let's scoop out a bit of time to plan our approach, to work out what it is we're going to do, how we're going to do this. And in iteration 1, if you like, is where you do some thinking and then you chunk up the rest of it into the other iterations, the other chunks that you're doing. So that was my first piece. Now, funnily enough, I was watching an old Friends episode a couple of days ago, and it was one where Monica and Chandler were getting married, and Chandler was always a little bit nervous about those big emotional pieces, and he went missing. He ran away, and when his best friend Ross found him, Ross needed to sort of reel him back in, get him home and get him ready for the wedding. And if you haven't seen it, it's all about resilience. What Ross says is, well, yes, getting married is a big thing, but let's not think about that. Why don't you just come home? He was in his office at the time, Chandler. Why don't you just come home and have a shower and change your clothes? Having a shower is not that frightening, is it? That's not too overwhelming. Let's just take baby steps. And that really is that agility mindset kicking in. This is what the roadmap is all about, is however much people are overwhelmed by what you're asking them to do, let's have a little look at how we can make it just that little bit smaller. So let's just break this down into something, a little tiny step. And of course, we come back to positivity almost immediately, because as soon as you've broken something down into a smaller step, you have something you can celebrate. So Chandler can celebrate, I've had my shower, I feel cleaner, right? And then, I put my clothes on, I'm fully dressed, I'm ready to go. So there is something in there around connecting this agility with that positivity that I think is really helpful, really important. Now, I'm taking this from the Agile Change Agent course. So what we tend to look at is in any of the iterations, we would break down the work that we want to get. We want to get to an outcome. We would break it out into, there are always 3 processes for getting work done. The first is getting started. Getting started is where you brainstorm, you have ideas, you discover, you research, you design, whatever words you want to use, but you kind of get your ideas together and then you plan, where you try to put them into some kind of priority order. What am I going to do first? What am I going to do next? So the getting started is a bit of time where you're dedicated to the ideas piece. And then the making progress, of course, is where you actually do the work. But getting started gives you an opportunity to break it down into tiny pieces. And then in making progress, you can do each tiny piece one after the other and test out, measure, evaluate, review that it's right, whatever quality word you want to use there. And then you can tick that off. Done, 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 done. I know, for example, that I'm bringing in another technique now, which is around physicality and visualization, which is what I will do sometimes is I will break down all of my tasks into a huge number of things. But what I will do is in that discover step is I will write a post-it note for each one of them, she says, grabbing her post-it notepad. And I will put all of those post-it notes up on my wall. And then in that way, in fact, I'm just going to, because I want to be an authentic leader, I'll just show you as I'm doing it. So there you can see that I've got one on my wall there in my office, is that I will take each post-it note off as I've done it, each task. Now that one of those tasks might take me 10 minutes, another one might take me half an hour. But I will peel them off and I scrunch them up and put them in the bin. And then I look back at a slightly less overwhelming grid that I've got there. So again, you can use other techniques. That comes from the idea of positivity and feeling like you've had an achievement, you've made progress. So that's another. It's a little trick, but it really works. Some people find that actually sort of just scoring a line through something on a to-do list works just as well. But it is that when you're in making progress, how are you physically engaging with your progress? Because I had an experience during the summer of 2020 when we were in lockdown. And I remember it was a truly awful person. She was a really, really nasty president of an organization. And she'd chosen that Sunday morning to send out a horrible email. And once you'd seen it, you couldn't unsee it. And it was just like the criticism, the vileness of her nastiness to everybody. And it really affected me because it was an important day. It was a day when it was the first day coming out of lockdown where we could go and see people outside, but still see people. And I was taking my dad out and I needed to change my mindset incredibly quickly to away from all that negativity and to feel celebratory because I wanted my dad to enjoy the first sort of social contact he'd had for months, and me being miserable wasn't going to help. And I remember that I did something where I picked up a task where I could have an immediate achievement. It was Sunday. I didn't want to be in my office, but and what I did was I just thought, I'm going to have a big tidy up now. I'm going to really make progress. I'm going to have a tidy office. I'm not doing any actual work, but what I'm going to do is I've got loads of notes of things I've been doing. I'm just going to go through them, check that I've captured bits, act on some of them. And you know what I did? I had all of those on the left-hand side. And as I did each piece of paper, I moved it to the right-hand side and I scrunched it up. So I had it sat on the desk and I had one after the other as I worked through these things. Now I actually sat there because it was very early in the morning when I saw the horrible email and I couldn't rest. So I did all of that and I created that very physical sort of feeling of, wow, look at all those pieces of paper I've now dealt with. So when you're making progress, there has to be something about that physical environment. If you can create that, as I've said, I've used post-it notes, I've used scrunched up paper. Some people, I know a friend of mine uses a colouring book and she colours in on a mind map, each one that she's done. So she colours it in green as she does it. And that makes her happy, but whatever works for you. And then the realising benefits is the bit where we're going, right, that bit's going into use now. So we've done it and we can celebrate that we've done it. So the roadmap technique, when you're looking at any kind of change that you've got to make at work, for example, you're going to go through those 3 phases, getting started, making progress, realizing benefits before you move on to the next iteration. So this technique encourages you to break things down and it encourages you to have early, well, organizationally, we're going to call it early return on investment, aren't we? But when it comes to us in terms of how we feel, it's that early recognition we've had an achievement. So let me take you through what I then sort of went through is that, so iteration 1, I had got to an absolute break point. I'd actually spent an entire day trying to write the paper, and I had done exactly what I showed you earlier on. I kept getting distracted by easier pieces of work. Now, the thing is, that always gets my attention, because when it comes to our own work, we know that everybody we're working with, if their resilience drops, they'll probably still be busy, because there's lots of other things they can be doing, a lot of easier things they can be doing. So it always gets my attention, because it makes me think, oh, yes, you wouldn't have noticed I was having a crisis of confidence that day in my office, because I was phenomenally busy and very productive, but not on the stuff that I should have been doing. And I think that's another interesting thing. It's sort of like, you know, I wasn't feeling resilient. I was emotionally a wreck, but I was able to do lots of really simple, easy things to do. So that's worth thinking about when you're thinking, how are people feeling? You cannot necessarily notice it from their productivity. I do something with my teams where every time we have a team meeting, we do a little radar where we go, well, how are we feeling? We rate our feelings. How are we feeling today? How upbeat are we feeling? And I ask them to go, well, does that feel better or worse than last week? And I pair them up, and I get them talking about, well, why do you think you don't feel quite so good today? Or why do you feel good? To help people just, you know, feel. It's about focus. It's about being in a reflective state to find out, am I struggling? Am I struggling with the stress around here? As I said, the thing to remember about resilience is you can't notice it. I don't think you'll notice it in a lack of productivity necessarily. I was an emotional mess. I'd convinced myself I couldn't get this done. And I was hating myself, really despising myself for just not getting on with it. But I just was distracted left, right, and center by easy bits and pieces. And it's just like, oh, for heaven's sake, you know? So this ability to break things down is a structural element of resilience. So what I then did was I looked at, okay, what's the story I need to tell you? Well, I need to make the case for resilience. I need to explain some techniques. I need to then create the slides you're going to see, and additional collateral, the report that I've produced. Okay, all right. And what I did with this is I thought, well, just, you know, start with the story. Just start with something. And again, I think the thing here is that you're getting people to sort of roadmap their way out of a crisis sometimes. This is a great coaching technique. What you want to do is, just like we do with any kind of brainstorming, when people have ideas, you don't go in and criticize them. You don't say, well, I wouldn't start with that, or that doesn't feel logical to me. You congratulate them for having broken down this bigger picture into pieces, whatever the pieces are that make sense for them, first of all, and in whatever order makes sense for them. Because the other thing to think about is, if I want to encourage resilience, just like Ross was trying to get Chandler to just go and have a shower, change your clothes, rather than focusing on, I'm getting married. What you want is for them to find something that they find easy to do and that they like doing. I do a big session on this in the Agile Change Agent course, because it's so important. You can cut through, you don't need to worry about whether or not you believe in all these personality profiling tools or different things about how people learn in different ways. There will always be tasks that an individual likes doing. We've all got our own preferences. And there will always be tasks that we find easy to do. Yeah. So yes, you can use the Sendelaney model. I've seen you put that in the chat there. You can use the Myers-Briggs type indicator. The insights model is, you know, when we're feeling red, blue, green, and yellow, I think it is. Sorry about this. So you can use any of those things, but ultimately, I'm not really interested in the bigger personality type here. I'm coaching somebody through a resilience situation. I want them to find something that they find easy to do, that they like doing. So that's what I think you concentrate on. Sometimes we find things that are easy to do that we don't like doing. We're not looking for that. For example, I find it easy to do travel planning and scheduling. I used to be a project, then a program manager, global program director. So probably planning is in my blood. I do not enjoy it. I've become the family travel agent. I do not enjoy it, but I can do it. I find it easy. But there are things that I enjoy doing that I find hard, like writing books. I'm writing a new book on neuroscience for change at the moment. I find that hard, but I do enjoy the intellectual stimulation of it. But some things that I find easy and I like doing, it's that cross section that's the thing that you're really looking for. So something I find easy, like delivering this webinar, and I love doing. I love the delivery part of it, and I find that really easy, much easier than writing stuff. So maybe we'd find something where I could, the easy bit, if I can bring that forward, that'd be really helpful. Yeah. So whatever the order of these tasks, do not critique it, just make sure that people are able to sort of see it for themselves. And then what I did was I thought, right, okay, right, what we want to focus on is not the whole webinar, the whole piece that I was writing for you. I just want to take iteration 2. So I wasn't looking at this whole thing. I'm not planning end to end. After all, this is an agile roadmap. So what we do is we break it up into the chunks, and we've got this sort of flow, which is brilliant, because neuroscientifically that meets a primary driver in the brain, which is for certainty. Our brains love to know the end-to-end journey, because then that's telling the brain, look, we know what we're doing. We know where we're heading. So our brains really enjoy that. Our brains absolutely loathe uncertainty. And I think a couple of you put in the chat how humans do not like change. Well, we don't like the uncertainty around it. We're actually quite flexible, but we don't like the uncertainty piece. So your roadmap addresses that primary need. But what you then do is you don't obviously plan everything in detail. So just concentrate on the next baby step in front of you. And so in this case, the baby step was, okay, I need to for you, I need to give you the case for resilience. So I've got to be able to give you lots of different definitions, quotes, whatever, of what resilience is. And so I talked about the Latin, for example. I talked about why it matters. So David Kessler, I talked about the volumes of change. So I came up with things. So those are the 2 things. And of course, so I broke that down. What is it? Why is it relevant to change? And then why it matters. What happens if we don't have it? Statistics for resilience. So I started by breaking this down, suddenly this work, suddenly it's like that. Ooh, okay, I'm starting to visualize what the work is. I'm starting to see that each of those lower level boxes is actually a doable piece. Can I write a couple of sentences on what resilience is? Yes, I can. Can I write a paragraph that links it back to why it's important for change? I'll do that now. And I actually, the next morning, after that Monday where I had my complete meltdown, I actually got up at 5 o'clock on the Tuesday morning, and this is what I did. And I'd done this planning the night before and felt I could sleep, because I felt like I knew what was coming up. So I met my brain's need for certainty, and then I just got on and did it. And then, of course, having done that, I could then move on to the next bit and the next bit and the next bit after that. So having got iteration 2, then what I was able to do is put things into the order in which I was going to do them. And then I could just scrunch up each of my Post-it notes as I did each one of those. So that for me, that's how I physically use this. But yes, Dave's talking about work breakdown structures, product breakdown structures, whatever. You're absolutely right. All of that word breakdown, Dave, it's all about the concept is decomposition. Can you decompose something from its bigger piece into much smaller pieces? And it absolutely is a skill. it's about looking, you know, if you have to look at like a sandwich, you decompose that into, well, we know that it contains bread. We know that it contains a filling. We know that it actually contains some kind of, maybe it's a butter or a mayonnaise or something that's spread on the bread. So bread, spread, and filling. So you decompose that and you think, okay, right, what about the filling? Oh, the filling might be several things like the lettuce, the tomato, and maybe the chicken. So then you've decomposed the filling into the things that it's part of. But it is that decomposition skill, that ability to look at anything, the end goal of anything, and go, what does that look like? So for me, for this webinar, what it looks like is, it looks like a whole pack of slides, and it also looks at that document, which is the key points I want to make. That's what I've got to get to. But that, if that feels too big, then I use this decomposition skill, and I actually go back and say, well, okay, then this is where we go to, isn't it? You take that overall piece and you break it down into these smaller pieces. So absolutely right, Dave. It is the work breakdown structure. It's that decomposition bit. If you've got questions, by the way, do put them in the chat function. I know some of you are hungry now, and you want me to finish. So it's only 1:45. So I'll go as fast as I can. But if anybody else has got questions, other than the sandwich making them hungry, I'm sorry, I should have used something else as an example. Then I'll carry on. So this roadmap is a structural support to resilience, but we've also talked about some of the physical pieces around it, definitely. This brings me to something else, which is, I said in iteration 1, you know, that's a bit of planning for the rest of your roadmap. Obviously, I roadmap all of the changes that I make. Jenny's on the call, and she called me out on this on an email earlier this week, where I said in the paper that I'd written that I believed that creating resilience is an objective of all change initiatives. That's certainly it's my personal view that it should be, Jenny, to be honest. And there's a very good reason for that. I think that, as I said, resilience is smart working. And I think that the thing that we don't have at the moment is capacity for change. And as I've said, if I lose people from the change, I just can't, they give up too easy. And I've lost people that might have been willing to help me make the change. I need a very large proportion of my community to actually work in new ways for it to become the new norm, for us to realize the benefits. So change management is always a numbers game. You know, Professor John Cotter talks about sort of, you know, you have to get to about 75% of people if you want sustainable change. Others, you know, talk about this. It's not a simple majority, you know, and my own experience is it's good 8 out of 10 have to be on board. So resilience is one of my risk factors, because if I haven't got resilient people, then people are dropping away. And I'm not going to get to those high numbers of everybody working in new ways. So why wouldn't I strategize against that risk? And I think this is the thing that I think we need to think about, is when we're setting up our change initiative, I'm not sure that we do enough strategizing. Strategy is just a posh word for how on earth are we going to deliver this? So strategizing is planning out the bigger picture. And I think for the resilience strategy, it's, you know, you can use a lot of what's in this webinar, why resilience is needed. When resilience is needed. I think that's another thing, is thinking about, and I really like this because it comes much more from almost organizational resilience. There is, if you Google organizational resilience, it will actually take you into a world of risk management. Is our organization resilient against threats, is really what they're talking about. And when you look at that, you think there's some really useful thinking in there. Because it's talking about, well, how do I minimize the threat of not having enough resilience? And so one of the things you've got to look ahead and you go, well, when are the pressure points in this change? When are going to be the things that perhaps really push people's buttons and really anger them or really overwhelm them? do you know what? We ought to get ahead of that quite proactively, and make sure that we are caring for people even more. I know we talk a lot about psychological safety, and I know we talk a lot about coaching, mentoring, training, user guides, super users, all that sort of good stuff. But I think we can also be cleverer and go, do you know what? There are pressure points. Can we make sure that we're providing some of that safe space and supportive encouragement at those points? So when is resilience needed? I've talked about an approach of structural, emotional, and collaborative support. So I would ask you, have you got ideas for how you would provide all of those? And obviously this webinar was designed to help you find some of those. And then having a technique for each type of support. So we've talked about the emotional reframing of how you find the good stuff. There's a reframing in that you get the physical, I've had an achievement for every post-it note you scrunch up. The structural is obviously the road mapping. The collaborative is supporting people around. And then what resources do we need to actually have this resilience? And I also thought that I'd be a bit ignorant if I didn't, when I talk about resilience strategy, also talk about a reward strategy. Because I think that they go hand in hand sometimes, because when you've got resilience, people keep going. And we've talked about that idea of persistence and determination being celebrated and people being congratulated or complimented for those sorts of things. Then we ought to think about our reward strategy, because reward isn't always this idea of financial rewards. So agree and resource rewards, approach, how are you going to do the various rewards, So I think there's something in there around, what is it that you're sort of trying to do here, and how are you sort of at the end of the day, how are you going to reward if people do the things that you want them to do? So I think thinking ahead increases the chance that you'll actually get the resilience you're looking for. Resilience is not an accidental thing. You've actually got to put the effort into it. So I'm a big fan of the strategizing. It's a part of structural support, and I think it's something we should do. So hopefully we've got from this today, understanding the resilience, the origins, the impact, and the statistics around it. So you've got some useful information there. And then crucially, I've also given you how to. So we talked about the roadmap technique, and we also talk about the strategies technique. And all of this comes from the Agile Change Agent course, because if we're talking about agile change, we're talking about wave after wave of change. So clearly we're going to do a lot of the road mapping, a lot of that decomposition technique. Sounds easy to do, but actually building it as a skill set, it's like a muscle you have to develop, actually. And I think at the end of the day, investing a little bit of time in learning some of these things. We talk a lot about strategies on this course and how you develop those strategies. So if you want to sort of start thinking about that resilience piece, if you've got change where you think, I really need to get this sorted, then come and join me, because we will spend a couple of days learning lots and lots of techniques, because I will also do a piece around positivity, a huge piece on how we identify benefits, how we apply benefits for motivating people, not how we apply benefits for just creating a business case that authorizes a change. That's a sort of corporate objective. I look at benefits from their ability to influence, motivate, and persuade people. And so I think that's a core part of what we do on the course as well. Yeah. Somebody asked me to put up the last slide for a moment. So I think it was on the resilience strategy. So I don't know what your question was on that, but certainly developing this kind of piece. It needn't be a formal template, but answering those questions is really important. But there we go. You've got the recording of the webinar as well, hopefully. But I'm hoping you'll join me on the course. You can be in safe hands. People love the course because it's very practical and it's full of techniques. And I love delivering it because of that. It is about me giving people ideas, techniques. I want you to be able to do more than you could do when you first arrived. That's the whole point of coming on these courses. So you can always look at my Trustpilot reviews to find out what people are genuinely saying. But I hope to see you on a course very, very soon. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your points in the chat. I've tried to answer as many, but of course you can always get hold of me via LinkedIn or melanie@agilechangemanagement.co.uk. Thank you so much for all those who've taken the Agile Change Agent course who are on here today, and who've said lovely things as well, because that's always really nice to hear. So hopefully I'll see you on a course very soon, or you'll realise that maybe it's time to get your colleagues on the course as well. I'm going to stop the recording now. I hope you have a very nice afternoon. I'm going to go and get lunch in a little while. Take care, guys. Thank you.